It was supposed to be just another tragic accident. The kind you see on the news and forget the next day. A late-night crash. A single victim. No witnesses. Case closed. But when investigators took a closer look at the scene, something didn't add up. The damage didn't match the story. The timeline felt off. And then they found something no one was supposed to see. Something hidden. Something that turned a simple accident into a chilling mystery. By the time the truth began to surface, it was already too late for someone to take it back. This is the story of a case that shocked an entire community. A case that started with a lie and ended with a truth far darker than anyone imagined. It all began on a quiet stretch of road just outside a small suburban town in the United States. The kind of place where nothing really happens, where neighbors know each other, where people leave their doors unlocked. On a cold evening in late November, emergency services received a 911 call. The caller sounded panicked, breathless. He reported that his wife had been in a car accident. He said she lost control of the vehicle, that it all happened so fast. When police arrived, they found the car off the side of the road. The front end was crushed against a tree. Inside, a woman in her early 30s sat motionless in the driver's seat. Her name was Emily Carter, a mother, a teacher, someone described by friends as kind, warm, and full of life. Paramedics worked quickly, but it was clear almost immediately. Emily was gone. At first glance, everything pointed to a tragic accident. Wet roads, low visibility. Maybe she swerved. Maybe she was distracted. These things happen. The husband, Daniel Carter, told officers that Emily had left home earlier that evening to run a quick errand. He said he got worried when she didn't return. Then he found her car. His story seemed believable. His emotions seemed real. He cried. He shook. He held his head in his hands as officers tried to comfort him. No one had any reason to doubt him. But one officer at the scene noticed something strange. The impact didn't look right. The car had significant damage, yes, but not in the way you'd expect from a high-speed crash. The angle was odd. The skid marks, or lack of them, raised questions. It was as if the car hadn't even tried to stop. Still, accidents can be unpredictable. And at that moment, there wasn't enough to suggest anything more. Emily's body was transported for autopsy. The car was towed. The scene was cleared. And just like that, the case was almost closed. Almost. The next day, the medical examiner made a call that changed everything. Emily's injuries didn't fully match the crash. Yes, she had trauma consistent with an impact. But there were also signs of something else. Something that may have happened before the car ever hit that tree. Subtle at first, easy to miss. But once you saw it, you couldn't ignore it. Bruising, unusual patterns, timing that didn't line up. The case was no longer just an accident. Detectives reopened the investigation. Quietly at first. They didn't want to jump to conclusions, but they needed answers. And the first place they looked was inside Emily's life. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Emily and Daniel had been married for 8 years. They had a young daughter. They lived in a comfortable home. Friends described them as a happy couple. No major issues. No public fights. Nothing that would raise red flags. But as detectives dug deeper, cracks began to show. Neighbors mentioned hearing arguments. Not frequent, but intense when they happened. A coworker recalled Emily once showing up to work unusually quiet, distant, with what looked like a bruise on her arm. When asked about it, she brushed it off, said it was nothing. Then came the financial records. Daniel had been under pressure, mounting debt, risky investments that hadn't paid off, credit cards maxed out, loans taken out quietly, things Emily may not have fully known about. And then there was the insurance policy. Just months before the accident, Daniel had increased Emily's life insurance coverage significantly. Now the case was shifting. What once looked like a random tragedy was starting to feel planned. Detectives brought Daniel in for a formal interview. This time, things were different. The tone was more serious, the questions more specific. They asked about his timeline, his movements, the last time he saw Emily. At first, his story stayed consistent, calm, controlled. But as the questions became more detailed, small inconsistencies began to appear. Nothing major, just little things. Times that didn't quite match. Details that shifted slightly. The kind of things most people wouldn't notice unless they were looking very closely. And detectives were. They asked him about the road where the accident happened, why Emily would be there. It wasn't a usual route for errands. In fact, it was out of the way. Daniel hesitated, just for a second. Then he said maybe she took a shortcut. Maybe she got lost. He wasn't sure. But that hesitation, it stuck. Meanwhile, forensic teams examined the car more thoroughly, inside and out. Every detail mattered now. That's when they found it, hidden in plain sight. A small trace, easy to overlook, but impossible to explain if this was truly an accident. It was evidence that suggested Emily may not have been alone in that car. And suddenly, everything changed. Investigators began to consider a possibility no one wanted to say out loud. What if this wasn't an accident at all? What if someone had been with her moments before the crash? And if that was true, where were they now? The pressure started to build. Detectives widened their search. They looked at phone records, text messages, location data. Emily's phone told a story Daniel hadn't mentioned. In the hours before her death, she wasn't running errands. She was meeting someone. The location matched the road where the crash occurred, but there was no record of who she was meeting. No saved contact. Just a number. Unfamiliar. Unregistered. When detectives traced it, they hit a dead end. A burner phone. Now the case was no longer just suspicious. It was dangerous, because someone had gone to great lengths to hide their involvement. And the question became, why? Daniel was brought in again. This time, detectives confronted him with the new evidence, the inconsistencies, the phone records, the strange details from the crash. He denied everything. He insisted he had nothing to do with it. But his confidence was starting to crack. You could hear it in his voice, see it in his body language. The calm, grieving husband from before was fading. And in his place was someone nervous, defensive, careful, too careful. Outside the interrogation room, detectives compared notes, every piece of evidence, every statement, every timeline. And slowly, a picture began to form. A picture that didn't look like an accident. A picture that looked like something else entirely. Something planned. Something deliberate. But they still needed proof. Because suspicion isn't enough. They needed something concrete. Something undeniable. And what they would find next would turn this case into one of the most chilling investigations the town had ever seen. Because buried beneath the surface of this accident was a truth no one was ready for. And once it came out, there was no going back. If you think you already know where this is going, trust me, you don't. Because the next part of this story changes everything. The more investigators looked into Emily's final hours, the less Daniel's story made sense. It wasn't just one detail anymore. It was a pattern, a series of small cracks that, when put together, started to look like something much bigger. Detectives went back to the crash site. This time, they weren't just documenting an accident. They were treating it like a potential crime scene. They walked the road slowly, measured distances, studied angles, looked for anything that might have been missed the first time. And then they noticed something else. About 20 feet before the point of impact, there were faint marks on the pavement. Not skid marks, not from braking. These looked different, almost like the car had slowed down deliberately. That didn't fit. If Emily had lost control, there should have been signs of panic, sudden braking, swerving, something chaotic. But this felt controlled, like the car had been positioned. Forensic analysts took samples, photographed everything, reconstructed the movement of the vehicle, and their early conclusion raised even more questions. It was possible that the crash had been staged. Back at the station, detectives pulled surveillance footage from nearby roads and businesses. It wasn't a busy area, but there were a few cameras along the main routes leading in and out. Hours of footage, car after car, most of it irrelevant, until one clip stood out. A dark-colored SUV appeared on camera roughly 15 minutes before the estimated time of the crash. It turned onto the same road where Emily's car was later found. Nothing unusual at first. But then, about 10 minutes later, that same SUV came back. Only this time, it was alone. No signs of damage, no erratic driving, just calmly leaving the area. Detectives froze the frame, zoomed in. The license plate was partially visible. Not enough to read clearly, but enough to narrow things down. They ran it through the system, cross-referenced similar vehicles in the area. It took time, but eventually, they found a match. The SUV was registered to a rental company. That complicated things. Rental vehicles are harder to trace. Anyone could have been driving it, but there was still a record, a name, attached to the rental. When detectives pulled the file, they didn't expect what they saw. The vehicle had been rented just 2 days before the crash, under a name that meant nothing to them, but the address listed did. It was only a few miles from Daniel and Emily's home. Now the pressure was rising. Detectives paid a visit to the rental company. They spoke with employees, reviewed security footage from the day the SUV was picked up. And there he was, a man in his late 30s, baseball cap, sunglasses, trying not to stand out. But he made one mistake. He used his real driver's license. The name matched the rental record. And when detectives dug deeper into that name, they found something even more interesting. The man had a connection to Daniel. Not a close friend, not family, but someone from his past. An old coworker, someone who had recently fallen on hard times, someone who might have needed money. Now the pieces were starting to move. Detectives brought the man in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. Said he rented the SUV for personal reasons. Claimed he had no idea what they were talking about. But when they showed him the footage, when they placed him near the scene, when they told him what they already suspected, his story began to fall apart. His hands shook. His voice cracked. And then, he asked a question that changed the entire direction of the case. How much do you already know? That was the moment. The moment detectives realized they were no longer dealing with a possibility. They were dealing with a plan. The man, his name was Eric, eventually started talking. Slowly at first, carefully choosing his words. But once he began, he couldn't stop. He admitted to being there that night. He admitted to meeting Emily. But what he said next sent chills through the room. He claimed it wasn't supposed to happen like that. According to Eric, Daniel had approached him weeks earlier, told him he needed help, said he was in trouble financially, that he needed a way out. At first, Eric thought it was just talk, desperation. But then Daniel made an offer. Money, a lot of it, in exchange for one thing, helping stage an accident. Eric said the plan was simple. He would meet Emily on that road. Under a false pretense, Daniel would make sure she went there. Then, Eric would scare her, force her off the road, make it look like she lost control. No direct harm, no physical contact, just enough to cause a crash. But something went wrong. Eric's voice trembled as he explained it. Emily didn't react the way they expected. She didn't panic. She got out of the car. She confronted him. And that's when everything changed. According to Eric, the situation escalated. Words were exchanged. She realized something wasn't right. She tried to leave, and in that moment, things got out of control. He claimed he didn't mean to hurt her, but the evidence would later suggest otherwise. Detectives listened carefully. Every detail mattered. Every word added another layer to the truth. But there was one question they kept coming back to. Where was Daniel during all of this? Because if Eric was telling the truth, then Daniel wasn't just involved. He was the one who set everything in motion. They checked Daniel's phone records again, this time looking for any contact with Eric. At first glance, nothing. No calls, No texts. Clean. Too clean. So they went deeper. Deleted data. Recovered messages. Digital footprints most people don't even know exist. And that's when they found it. A series of messages. Erased, but not gone. Conversations between Daniel and Eric. Detailed. Specific. Planning every step. The location. The timing. The story they would tell afterward. Even the part about Daniel finding Emily after the crash. It was all there. Laid out like a script. Cold. Calculated. Deliberate. Now they had it. Proof. Real. Undeniable proof. But even with all of that, one detail still didn't sit right. Something about Eric's version of events. Something about the way he described that night. It didn't fully match the forensic evidence. Not completely. And that meant one thing. There was still more to this story. Something hidden. Something neither of them had admitted yet. And whatever it was, it had the potential to change everything. Because sometimes, the truth isn't just darker than you expect. Sometimes, it's worse than anything you could imagine. And in this case, they were getting closer to that truth. With every passing hour, what they didn't realize yet was just how far Daniel was willing to go to make sure it stayed buried. By the time Eric finished talking, the room felt heavier. Not just because of what he admitted, but because of what didn't quite line up. Detectives had heard enough confessions to know when something was missing, and this one had gaps. Eric claimed things got out of control, that it wasn't supposed to go that far. But the forensic report told a slightly different story. Emily's injuries weren't consistent with a sudden struggle alone. There were signs of repeated force, controlled, intentional. That didn't sound like panic. That sounded like someone making sure of something. And if Eric wasn't acting alone in that moment, then where was Daniel? Detectives didn't waste time. They brought Daniel in again. This time, it wasn't a conversation. It was an interrogation. They sat him down in a small, quiet room. No distractions, just a table, a chair, and the weight of everything they now knew. At first, Daniel tried to stay calm. He repeated his story, the same version he'd been telling since the beginning. But detectives didn't challenge him right away. They let him talk. They let him build his version of reality, piece by piece. And then they started taking it apart. They showed him the surveillance footage, the SUV entering and leaving the road. They showed him the rental agreement, Eric's face on camera. The connection between them. Daniel's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Then came the phone records, the recovered messages, line after line of planning, coordination, intent. This time, Daniel didn't speak. He just stared at the table. And then, they showed him the final piece. A detail Eric didn't know they had. Something small. Something almost invisible, unless you were looking for it. A traffic camera, several miles away from the crash site, had captured a vehicle passing through an intersection just minutes before Emily's estimated time of death. The car matched Daniel's. Same make, same model, same license plate. That meant one thing. Daniel hadn't been at home, waiting. He had been out there, closer than he ever admitted. The room went silent. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. His breathing slowed. His hands tightened together on the table. And then, he asked for water. It was subtle, but detectives recognized it immediately. That was the shift. When someone asks for a pause like that, it usually means the story is about to change. When he looked up again, his eyes were different, less controlled, less certain. He didn't confess right away. Instead, he tried to explain. He said things had been difficult, that the financial pressure was overwhelming, that he felt trapped, like everything was closing in. He admitted to contacting Eric, admitted to discussing a plan, but he still tried to minimize it. He said it was never supposed to end in death. He said he just wanted a way out. But detectives weren't interested in excuses. They wanted the truth. So they pushed further. They asked him about that night, about the drive, about why his car was near the scene. And that's when the final layer started to break. Daniel took a deep breath. And then he told them what really happened. He said he followed Emily that night, at a distance. He wanted to make sure everything went according to plan. He watched as she arrived at the location, watched as she got out of the car to meet Eric. At first, things seemed to go as expected. But then, Emily became suspicious. She started asking questions, and when Eric couldn't give her answers, she realized something was wrong. She tried to leave. That's when Daniel stepped in. He approached from the darkness, called out to her, and for a moment, everything stopped. Because Emily recognized him. Imagine that moment, standing on a quiet, empty road, realizing the person you trust most is part of something you don't understand. According to Daniel, she was confused at first, then angry, then afraid. She demanded answers. She asked him what was going on, and instead of telling her the truth, he made a decision that would define everything that came next. He told detectives that things escalated quickly, that Emily threatened to go to the police, that she said she would expose everything, and in that moment, he panicked. But again, the evidence didn't fully support panic, because what happened next took time, deliberate time. Daniel admitted that he grabbed her, that he tried to stop her from leaving. Eric joined in. The two of them, working together. Emily fought back. She struggled. She tried to break free, but she was outnumbered. And eventually, she stopped moving. The room went silent again as Daniel spoke those words. No emotion, no tears this time, just facts, cold and flat. He said they stood there for a moment, not knowing what to do, and then they went back to the plan. They placed her in the driver's seat, adjusted everything, made it look like she had been alone, like she lost control. They even took time to think about the details, the angle of the crash, the position of the car, and then Daniel left. He drove away, waited, and then returned later to discover the scene, to make the 911 call, to play the role he had already practiced in his mind. A grieving husband, a man who had just lost everything. But now, that performance was over. Detective sat there, letting the weight of his confession settle in. Because this wasn't just a crime of desperation. This was something else. Something calculated, something planned, and then adjusted when things went wrong. But even now, there was still one question that lingered, one detail that didn't fully fit. Because the medical examiner had noted something very specific, something that neither Daniel nor Eric had mentioned. A substance found in Emily's system, not enough to kill her, but enough to affect her, to slow her down, to make her vulnerable. Detectives looked at Daniel and asked the question directly, "What did you give her?" For the first time since he started talking, Daniel hesitated. A real hesitation. His eyes shifted, his jaw tightened. And in that moment, it became clear there was one more secret, one more piece of the truth. He hadn't told them yet. And whatever it was, it meant this wasn't just a plan that went wrong. It was a plan that had been even darker. From the very beginning, Daniel didn't answer right away. The question just sat there in the air, heavy, unavoidable. "What did you give her?" For a few seconds, all you could hear was the faint hum of the lights in the room. Daniel looked down at his hands, then back up. His expression had changed again, but this time, it wasn't panic. It was resignation, like he knew there was no point holding anything back anymore. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quieter than before. He said it started a few days earlier. He told detectives that he had been thinking about the plan, going over every detail, trying to make sure nothing could go wrong. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized something. Emily was strong, stronger than he had accounted for. If she resisted, if she fought back, the plan could fall apart. So he decided to make sure she wouldn't be able to. He admitted that on the night of the accident, before Emily left the house, he had given her something. A drink, something simple, something she wouldn't question. But it wasn't just a drink. It was laced with a sedative. Not enough to knock her out completely. Just enough to slow her reactions. To make her disoriented. To give him control over how the situation would unfold. That was the detail neither he nor Eric had mentioned. Because it changed everything. This wasn't just a plan that went too far. It was a plan designed to remove her ability to fight back from the very beginning. Detectives exchanged glances. They had suspected something like this, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a different way. Colder, more deliberate. Daniel continued. He said he watched as she left the house, knowing exactly what was already in her system. Knowing that by the time she reached that road, she wouldn't be thinking clearly. And when she did confront them, when she realized something was wrong, she wasn't at full strength. She tried to fight. She tried to get away. But she couldn't, because the outcome had already been set in motion long before she ever got into that car. The room felt smaller as the truth unfolded. Every piece now fit together. The financial pressure, the insurance policy, the staged crash, the hired help, the backup plan, all of it pointing to one conclusion. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't even a moment of panic. It was premeditated, calculated step by step. From the first conversation to the final phone call, Daniel was arrested that night. Eric, too, was taken into custody and formally charged. The case moved quickly after that. With the amount of evidence collected, the messages, the surveillance footage, the forensic reports, and Daniel's own confession, there wasn't much left to argue. In court, the prosecution laid out the timeline in chilling detail. Every decision, every action, every moment where Daniel could have stopped, but didn't. Emily's family sat through it all, listening, processing, trying to understand how someone they trusted, someone who had been part of their lives for years, could do something like this. There are no easy answers to that. There never are. Daniel was ultimately convicted. The charges were severe, and the sentence reflected that. Eric, having cooperated with investigators, received a lesser sentence, but one that would still take years of his life. And just like that, the case that started as a simple accident became something much darker. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats aren't strangers. They're the people closest to us, the ones we trust without question, the ones we never expect. Because on the surface, everything can look normal until it doesn't, until one small detail, one overlooked clue changes everything. And if there's one thing this case leaves behind, it's a question. How many other accidents out there aren't accidents at all? How many stories end before the truth ever gets uncovered? That's something worth thinking about. If this story got you thinking, or if you believe justice was served, let me know in the comments. And if you want more real cases like this, the ones that start simple but hide something deeper, make sure you subscribe and stay with me, because the next story might be even harder to believe.